The dojo was always quietest in the early hours before practice began, when the only sound was the rhythmic scrape of a broom across the polished wooden floor. A long-handled straw broom, worn smooth by years of use, swept patiently from one end of the mats to the other. Its wielder was a tall, broad-shouldered black man in his late 50s named Marcus Reed. To most of the students who came and went, Marcus was invisible. They saw the broom, the bucket, the mop, the rag. They did not see the man behind them. His face carried the weight of decades, creased lines along his brow, a jaw that had been clenched too many times, and eyes that gave away nothing. Those eyes were steady, calm, like water in a deep well. He moved with a deliberate grace that few noticed. To them, he was just the janitor. The man paid to sweep sweat and scrape away the grime that their training left behind. Nothing more, nothing less. Outside, dawn had just begun to break. Pale light filtered through the rice paper windows, casting soft rectangles across the tatami mats. Dust motes danced in the beams of light, swirling with each sweep of Marcus's broom. The dojo smelled faintly of cedar, sweat, and incense, an odd mixture that spoke of discipline and tradition. Marcus took his time with his work. His strokes were not hurried, nor lazy. Each sweep was even, precise, as though he were following a rhythm no one else could hear. It wasn't just cleaning to him, it was ritual. The mats had to be clean, not only because the fighters would use them, but because something inside Marcus demanded order. In the silence, the broom became an extension of his body. Step, sweep, step, sweep. Breath in, breath out, the door creaked behind him. Laughter spilled in as the first students arrived, their duffel bags slung over shoulders, their uniforms crisp, their voices loud with youth. They barely acknowledged Marcus. One of them, a lean boy with hair tied back in a sloppy bun, muttered, "Better watch out, don't trip over the janitor." The others laughed, not cruelly but dismissively, the way people laugh at something they've already decided is beneath them. Marcus did not respond. He shifted his broom slightly, sweeping along the edges where the wall met the mats. His silence wasn't surrender. It was a shield. Over the years, he had learned that words often wasted more strength than they were worth. Let them laugh, he thought. Their opinions would not change the dust on the floor. But if anyone had watched closely, they might have noticed how his hands moved, not just strong, but practiced. He gripped the broom with the same kind of measured hold a craftsman might take with a chisel, or a fighter might take with a weapon. His shoulders rolled fluidly with each stroke, never stiff, never clumsy. Even when bending, his back stayed straight, posture controlled, like a man accustomed to moving with intention. The sensei entered next, his crisp white gi pressed, his black belt tied with ceremonial precision. He glanced at Marcus but did not speak. It was not contempt, but habit. To him, Marcus was simply part of the building, like the tatami or the wooden beams overhead. More students poured in. Their energy filled the room, bouncing off the walls. They stretched, tied their belts, compared bruises from the last sparring session. One of them, a brash newcomer with a cocky grin, tossed his bag down and called across the room, "Hey, old man, make sure you scrub extra hard today. I don't want to slip on your missed spots." His friends laughed, loud and careless. Marcus paused. Just for a second, the broom stopped mid-sweep. His gaze lifted, locking briefly on the young fighter. His eyes, dark, unreadable, met the boy's, and in that instant there was silence. Not outwardly, but inwardly, something shifted. The boy smirked and turned away, thinking nothing of it, but Marcus's gaze lingered. Then, wordlessly, he resumed his sweeping. To anyone else, it seemed as if Marcus had accepted the insult, swallowed it whole. But inside his chest, a slow fire burned. Not anger, not the wild, uncontrolled kind that consumes a man, but the kind of fire that smolders, patient and controlled, waiting for the right moment to flare. The broom scraped across the mats once more. Step, sweep, step, sweep. His mind drifted, unbidden, to memories of years past. He had once worn a gi himself. Not white and fresh like the ones these boys wore, but faded from endless use, frayed at the edges, stained by sweat and struggle. He remembered the feel of it against his skin, the way the belt tightened around his waist, anchoring him not just to the fabric but to a code. Discipline. Respect. Mastery. He had been young once too, strong, faster than most, feared by many. But time, life, and choices had a way of moving a man from the center of the mat to its edges, broom in hand instead of belt around his waist. Still, the body never forgot. Muscle memory was a cruel companion, it stayed with you, even when you wanted to forget. Every sweep of the broom awakened that memory in Marcus. Every shift of his weight reminded him of stances long practiced. His silence was not ignorance. It was knowing too much. The chatter of the students grew louder as they warmed up. A few sparred lightly, testing each other with playful kicks and grabs. One tripped, landing hard on the mat, and cursed at Marcus as if it were his fault the floor was slick. Marcus only bowed his head slightly, tightening his grip on the broom. He thought of his late wife, who used to say, "A man isn't defined by what people see him doing, but by what he carries when no one notices." He carried her words with him, like a hidden weapon. He carried patience. He carried dignity. He carried a past these boys couldn't begin to imagine. By the time the last corner was swept, the dojo was alive with noise and movement. Marcus leaned the broom against the wall, wiping his hands on his worn work pants. He moved to gather his bucket, ready to step aside as he always did, to fade into the background while others claimed the spotlight of the mats. But this morning, something in the air was different. The laughter felt sharper, the insults heavier, as though the universe itself had grown tired of silence. Marcus felt it in his bones. Today the broom would not be the only tool in his hands. Today, the mats would demand something more. And when they did, he would be ready. The dojo was alive now. The air that had been calm during Marcus's morning sweeping had transformed into a storm of voices, movement, and energy. Students had filled the space like a tide, tossing their duffel bags to the side, cracking jokes, stretching loudly. The sharp slap of palms on thighs echoed as they knelt and bowed. The squeak of bare feet sliding on the polished mats filled the room. Marcus remained at the edge, bucket in hand, wiping away a faint scuff mark near the far wall. He preferred corners, he had always lived on the edges, the unseen places where no one thought to look. His movements were deliberate, his back turned slightly, his posture making him smaller. But no matter how much he tried to disappear, their voices dragged him back into their world. "Hey, Marcus," one boy called, grinning. His name was Brandon, a wiry 19-year-old who liked to be louder than his own talent justified. "Don't forget this spot over here." He slapped the mat with his palm, leaving behind a sweaty handprint, then smirked at his friends. "Oops, looks like I made more work for the janitor." Laughter erupted. Another boy, taller, broad-chested, his brown belt tied carelessly, joined in, "Careful, Brandon. He might miss a spot and you'll go sliding. Imagine losing a match because you tripped on mop water. That'd be embarrassing, huh?" The group roared, clutching their sides as though the joke had been worthy of a comedy stage. They were not cruel in the sense of wanting to break Marcus, but careless, thoughtless, young men who mistook mockery for camaraderie. They wanted to prove themselves, and Marcus was the easiest target. Marcus did not answer. His cloth pressed against the faint scuff, slow and steady. He did not look up. His silence was a wall they could not breach, though they tried. "Why doesn't he ever say anything?" a newcomer whispered, his voice low but audible. "It's creepy. Like he's just staring inside his head all the time." "Because he's got nothing to say," Brandon shot back quickly. "That's why. He's just here to clean up after us. That's all he'll ever be." He raised his voice, directing the words toward Marcus. "Right, old man? You hear me? Just keep scrubbing. Leave the fighting to the real men." The dojo erupted again in laughter. Their voices bounced off the wooden beams, growing louder and sharper. But not everyone laughed. In the back, near the wall, sat a quiet boy named Javier. 16, shy, the youngest of the group. He had always watched Marcus with more interest than the others. Where the others saw an invisible custodian, Javier sometimes saw the way Marcus's body shifted when he bent, the careful precision of his balance, the controlled flow of his movements. Something about Marcus's silence unsettled him, not because it was weak, but because it felt powerful, like a storm waiting behind heavy clouds. The sensei entered then, his sandals clicking softly against the floor. Instantly, the noise dimmed, replaced with bows and respectful murmurs. But the tension lingered, humming beneath the surface. "Line up," the sensei commanded. His voice was stern, sharp, a sound that cut through their arrogance like a blade. The students obeyed, forming their neat rows. Marcus continued cleaning the corner, pretending he did not exist in their world. But Brandon could not leave him alone. As they lined up, he leaned close to the tall brown belt and whispered just loudly enough, "Bet if you gave him a GI, he wouldn't even know how to put it on." Snickers followed. The sensei's back was turned. Emboldened, Brandon raised his voice again. "Hey, Marcus. You want a uniform? Maybe you can spar with Javier over there. You two would make a perfect match, neither of you knows what you're doing." Javier flushed red, his fists tightening. Marcus did not respond. He pressed the rag into the mat again, his shoulders calm, his breathing steady. The laughter grew sharper, echoing through the dojo like cruel music. The sound bounced off the walls, feeding itself, until even the students who had remained quiet joined in, afraid of being the next target. But Marcus's silence began to gnaw at them. There was no flare of anger, no defensiveness, no stammering denial. Just the broom, the rag, the steady movement. His calmness was unnerving, though they did not yet realize why. Brandon, frustrated by the lack of reaction, took a step farther. He scooped up his folded GI jacket from his bag, held it high, and with a theatrical flick tossed it across the mats. The white fabric landed at Marcus's feet with a dull slap. "Here you go, janitor," Brandon jeered. "Now you can be one of us. Try it on. Maybe we'll let you join class if you don't trip over yourself." The dojo erupted again. Laughter rolled across the mats like thunder. Students bent over, clutching their knees, pointing at Marcus as though the sight of him standing there, broom in one hand and GI at his feet, were the funniest image they had ever seen. Even the sensei frowned slightly, though he said nothing. His silence was not approval, but habit. To him, Marcus was outside the circle of discipline. He was not student nor teacher. He was the man who swept floors, and nothing more. Marcus stood still. For the first time, his hands paused on the broom handle. His gaze fell to the GI, white against the dark mats, the belt coiled like a snake beside it. He did not bend immediately. He did not speak. He simply looked, as though weighing something far heavier than fabric. The laughter began to falter. Something in the stillness unnerved them. Brandon's grin wavered, though he tried to hold it. "Well, pick it up, janitor. Or are you afraid of touching it?" Javier swallowed hard. He saw it, the faint tightening of Marcus's jaw, the subtle shift in his shoulders. He recognized something the others did not. This was not the stillness of fear. This was the stillness of control. The broom slid slowly from Marcus's hand, leaning against the wall. The sound of it resting echoed louder than their laughter had a moment before. His movements were deliberate, slow, calculated. He bent, lifted the GI with both hands, and held it up. The room fell silent. No one could explain why. It was just a man picking up cloth, after all. But the way he handled it, the reverence in the touch, the familiarity of the gesture, it spoke of history. The students felt it without understanding. Marcus looked down at the GI for a long moment. Then, without a word, he folded it across his arm, his eyes unreadable. The laughter had ended. In its place was something else, curiosity, unease, the first spark of recognition that maybe they had stirred something they could not control. Marcus said nothing. He didn't need to. The silence spoke for him. And though the mats were still covered in sweat and scuffs, it was no longer the cleanliness of the floor that anyone cared about. It was the man who held the GI in his hands. The dojo, moments ago alive with cruel laughter, had grown uncomfortably quiet. The GI lay folded in Marcus's hands, and with each second of silence, unease spread among the students. What had started as a harmless joke, a way to remind the janitor of his place, suddenly felt heavier than they had intended. Brandon, who had thrown the uniform, broke the quiet first. His voice wavered with a false bravado that didn't reach his eyes. "What's the matter, old man? Don't know which way to wear it? Maybe I should show you how to tie the belt." He laughed, but the sound was thinner now, forced. A few students chuckled weakly, their eyes darting between Marcus and Brandon. Marcus didn't look at them. He set the GI down on the wooden bench with careful precision, smoothing the fabric as though it were something sacred. His movements were deliberate, and that calm precision gnawed at the boy's confidence. He didn't seem rattled, not even embarrassed. In fact, he didn't seem small at all. The sensei, standing at the front of the room, cleared his throat. He had been silent during the earlier exchange, unwilling to interfere in childish banter. But now he watched Marcus more closely, his sharp eyes narrowing. There was something in the man's posture, shoulders straight, head slightly inclined, that unsettled him. The way Marcus had bowed unconsciously before placing the GI down, it had not been a janitor's gesture. It had been a practitioner's bow. "Enough," the sensei said firmly, breaking the tension. "Line up. Class begins now." But Brandon wasn't finished. His pride, pricked by the silence, demanded attention. He took a step toward Marcus, his chest puffed. "Come on, sensei. Let him try it on. What harm could it do? Maybe he'll clean faster once he learns how the mats feel." His friends snickered, emboldened by his persistence. The sensei's gaze snapped to him, stern. "Brandon." His voice was a warning. But Brandon ignored it. His eyes gleamed with the reckless fire of youth. He bent down, snatched the GI from the bench, and tossed it back at Marcus, harder this time. The cloth slapped against Marcus's chest and slid into his arms. "Put it on," Brandon demanded, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Unless you're scared." The dojo froze. A challenge had been issued, whether Brandon realized it or not. In the world of martial arts, words carried weight. An invitation to step onto the mats was never just a joke. It was a test. And the way Brandon had thrown down his words made it clear, this wasn't playful anymore. This was about dominance. Marcus looked at him then. Really looked. His eyes, dark and steady, locked onto Brandon's. There was no anger in them, no defensiveness, only a quiet certainty that made Brandon's stomach tighten. For the first time, the young man felt as though he had awakened something far beyond his control. Marcus shifted slightly, laying the broom aside. He unfolded the GI with slow, deliberate movements, the kind of movements that spoke of memory, of ritual. The students leaned forward without realizing it, caught in the gravity of his silence. "You don't have to," the sensei said suddenly, his voice softer than before. There was no command in it, only something Marcus recognized, respect. It was the first time the sensei had spoken to him as though he were more than a fixture in the room. Marcus didn't answer. He slid one arm into the GI sleeve, then the other. The white cloth settled on his shoulders as though it had been waiting for him. His large, weathered hands tied the belt with ease, the knot forming in one smooth motion. The students who had trained for years recognized it instantly, the knot of someone who had tied it countless times before. Not a janitor fumbling with strange fabric, but a fighter reclaiming something long set aside. Brandon's grin faltered. He stepped back, but pride forced him to stand tall. "All right then," he said loudly, trying to regain the upper hand. "Why don't you show us what you've got?" A little roll. Nothing serious. It was supposed to be a taunt, but it carried the weight of a formal challenge. Brandon stepped onto the center of the mats, bouncing lightly on his toes, his fists loose but ready. He was taller than Marcus, younger, faster, or so he believed. The other students circled instinctively, forming a ring. Their laughter had died away, replaced with anticipation. The sensei watched, silent. He should have stopped it. He knew the dojo was not a place for humiliating others. Yet something inside him whispered to let it unfold. His instincts as a teacher told him that there was more here than a foolish boy's pride. Marcus stepped forward, his bare feet whispering against the mats. He bowed, low, respectful, the bow of someone trained to honor the space and the opponent. Brandon returned it half-heartedly, smirking. "You sure about this, old man?" Brandon asked, his voice louder than his courage. "Don't break a hip." Marcus straightened. He didn't speak. He simply raised his hands into a stance that silenced the room. It wasn't sloppy. It wasn't awkward. It was precise, balanced, the stance of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Gasps rippled through the circle. Javier, the quiet boy, felt his heart pound. He had suspected, but now he knew, Marcus wasn't pretending. Brandon lunged, quick and reckless, his youthful energy propelling him forward. But Marcus moved with a speed that belied his age. He sidestepped, one hand redirecting Brandon's momentum, the other guiding him gently but firmly down. Brandon hit the mat with a thud, breath rushing from his lungs. The dojo exploded with sound, gasps, shouts, disbelief. Brandon scrambled up, red-faced, furious. He charged again, this time with more force, but Marcus's hands were steady, his movements effortless. Another twist, another redirect, and Brandon was on the ground once more, staring up at the ceiling in shock. The laughter was gone. In its place was awe. The sensei's eyes widened. He had seen these techniques before, not from his students, but from masters. Marcus wasn't just defending himself. He was teaching a lesson, one that no words could have carried. Brandon lay on the mat, humiliated, his pride shattered. Marcus stepped back, bowed once more, and returned to the edge of the room. He said nothing, only adjusted the gi on his shoulders. For a long moment, no one moved. The silence was heavy, broken only by the sound of Brandon's ragged breathing. Then, one by one, the students' eyes shifted, from Brandon, red-faced and trembling, to Marcus, calm and unshaken. The challenge that was never meant to be real had become something else entirely. A line had been crossed, and in crossing it, they had awakened a truth they could not put back to sleep. Marcus picked up the broom once more, as though nothing had happened. But everyone knew the mats had been changed forever. The dojo felt different. It wasn't just that Brandon had been thrown, twice, by the janitor. It was the silence that followed. That silence was alive, heavy, and suffocating. The air itself seemed to vibrate, as if the wooden beams of the old building had absorbed what had just happened and now held their breath, waiting for what might come next. Marcus stood near the edge of the mats, the gi resting comfortably across his frame, as though it had never left him. The broom leaned against the wall where he had left it, but nobody saw it anymore. All eyes were fixed on the man who, until that morning, had been invisible. Brandon was still on the floor, his pride more bruised than his body. He sat up slowly, sweat dripping down his face, his chest rising and falling with ragged breaths. The smirk he had worn earlier was gone, replaced by disbelief. His friends shifted uneasily, unsure if they should laugh it off or acknowledge the truth that stood before them. The sensei finally broke the silence. Enough. His voice carried authority, yet it lacked its usual sharpness. He sounded cautious, as though he too was unsure of what he had just witnessed. Brandon, back in line. Brandon opened his mouth to protest, but the sensei's eyes cut him down instantly. Reluctantly, he rose and rejoined the others, his shoulders slumped, his face turned away from Marcus. For the first time in a long while, he was quiet. The students lined up again, but their discipline was hollow. Their minds were elsewhere. Every stolen glance drifted toward Marcus, who had resumed his place by the wall, his posture steady, his breathing even. It was as though nothing had happened. He had taken off the gi top and folded it neatly beside him, returning to silence, yet the silence was no longer theirs to command. It belonged to him now. The sensei called out the day's drills, but even he faltered. His words felt strained. His authority, once unquestioned, now wavered under the weight of Marcus's presence. For decades, he had been master here, the embodiment of discipline and tradition. Yet, in a single moment, Marcus had reminded everyone, including the sensei, that mastery was not about titles or belts. It was something deeper, something that could not be erased by years of sweeping floors. The drills began, but the energy was fractured. Students moved through their kicks, throws, and holds, but their rhythm was broken. Their eyes betrayed them, constantly flicking to the man at the edge of the mats. Marcus sat still, watching quietly. His gaze wasn't piercing or proud. It was patient, detached, as though he were looking not at fighters but at children learning how to walk. Every slip, every imbalance, every wasted motion registered in his eyes. He had once been where they were, making the same mistakes, repeating the same drills until sweat pooled at his feet. And now, though he had no rank or title, he saw their flaws with a clarity sharper than any blade. Javier, the youngest, noticed most of all. He stumbled twice during drills because he could feel Marcus watching, not in judgment, but in understanding. It was unnerving and comforting all at once. Javier knew then that the janitor was no ordinary man. He carried something none of the others did, experience carved deep into bone. The dojo's air grew tense again when the sensei called for sparring practice. "Pair up," he ordered. "Control, respect, precision." His voice was firm, but his eyes flickered toward Marcus, just for a heartbeat. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but it betrayed something the students had never seen before: hesitation. Pairs were formed. The thuds of bodies hitting mats echoed through the space, accompanied by grunts and sharp exhalations. But the rhythm was broken. Everyone was too aware of the silent figure at the wall. Their movements were stiffer, their confidence shaken. Even Brandon, usually brash and eager, moved cautiously, stealing glances at Marcus whenever he could. Then it happened. A slip. One of the older students lost his balance and fell harder than expected, his elbow cracking against the mat. The sound drew sharp gasps. He winced, clutching his arm. His partner panicked, unsure how to help. Before the sensei could react, Marcus was already on his feet. He crossed the mats with a speed and certainty that startled everyone. He knelt beside the injured student, his large hands steady as he checked the joint, his movements confident, clinical. "It's not broken," he said softly, his voice deep but calm, carrying across the room like a low drum. "Out of place. Breathe." The boy obeyed instinctively. Marcus adjusted the arm with a controlled motion, a skillful pop echoing faintly as the joint slid back into alignment. The student exhaled in relief, eyes wide with shock. Marcus helped him sit up, then rose smoothly, stepping back as though nothing extraordinary had occurred. The dojo was silent again, but this time the silence was reverent. They had seen it twice now, Marcus's control on the mats, and now his knowledge of the body. He was not a janitor who had gotten lucky. He was something more. Something they didn't yet understand. The sensei's eyes narrowed. He knew that kind of skill. He had seen it in masters who had trained their entire lives, men whose names were spoken with respect across continents. And here it was, walking quietly among them, disguised as the man who swept their floors. Class ended earlier than usual. The sensei dismissed them with fewer words than normal, his voice subdued. The students packed their bags in silence, casting glances at Marcus as though he had become a ghost in their midst. Brandon avoided his gaze entirely, his arrogance shattered. Javier lingered by the door, watching Marcus pick up the broom once more. The sight was surreal. How could a man move like a warrior, heal like a master, and then return to sweeping floors without hesitation? It was as though he existed in two worlds, the one everyone saw, and the one none of them understood. Outside, the sky had turned gray. Clouds gathered, heavy and low, pressing down on the city. The air smelled of rain, sharp and metallic. The first drops tapped against the dojo's roof, soft at first, then harder, until the storm broke fully. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Inside, Marcus swept in silence, the broom sliding across the mats in rhythm with the rain above. Each stroke echoed through the dojo, steady and calm. The students had left, the sensei retreated to his office, but Marcus remained. The storm raged outside, yet he moved with perfect serenity. It was in that moment that the truth became undeniable. His silence wasn't weakness. It was strength, coiled tightly, waiting. The storm outside was only a reflection of the storm inside the dojo, one that had yet to break. Marcus's broom swept on. Step, sweep, step, sweep. But now, every corner of the dojo knew, this was not the silence of a janitor at work. It was the silence before the storm. The storm outside had not passed. It lingered in the skies above the city, thunder rolling low, lightning slicing jagged veins of light across the horizon. Inside the dojo, the storm mirrored itself in whispers. By the next morning, word of what had happened had spread. Students who hadn't been there crowded the doorway, eager to see if the rumors were true. Could it be? The janitor, Marcus, had thrown Brandon like a rag doll, twice, and silenced the whole room without a word. Brandon himself arrived later than usual, his pride still raw. He avoided Marcus's gaze, but his jaw was set. He needed to prove what had happened was nothing more than a fluke, an accident, a stumble in the heat of the moment. He had already replayed it in his mind 100 times, telling himself Marcus had caught him off guard. Nothing more. The dojo buzzed with nervous anticipation. The students stretched, tied their belts, murmured among themselves. Even the sensei seemed distracted, his stern eyes flicking now and then toward Marcus, who was once again sweeping calmly, the gi folded neatly at his side. It was as though he hadn't noticed the change in atmosphere, but of course, he had. Marcus noticed everything. When class began, the tension was impossible to ignore. Each strike, each throw, each spar carried an edge of impatience, as if everyone was waiting for something bigger, something unspoken. The air thickened with it. And then it happened. During a partner drill, Brandon accidentally shoved his opponent too hard, sending him sprawling across the mats. The boy scrambled up, annoyed but wary. Brandon smirked, then turned his head toward Marcus, who was wiping down the far wall. "You," Brandon said suddenly, his voice sharp. The dojo froze. All eyes turned. Marcus looked up slowly, cloth still in his hand. "Come here," Brandon demanded. "If you're so good, show us again. Show us it wasn't luck." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some were eager, hungry to see the truth. Others shifted uncomfortably, sensing danger. The sensei opened his mouth, ready to shut it down. But Marcus spoke first. His voice was low, calm, unhurried. "You want me to take the mats from you again?" The words were simple, yet they carried a weight that pressed into the room. Brandon stiffened, his pride forcing him forward. "This time, I'm ready." Marcus folded the rag, set it neatly aside, and walked onto the mats. He did not hurry. His movements were slow, measured, as though he had all the time in the world. When he stepped onto the tatami, the room grew smaller, quieter, as though the storm outside had forced itself through the walls. Brandon squared his shoulders, fists clenched. He bounced lightly on his toes, eyes sharp, his arrogance rallying for one last stand. His friends edged closer, forming a loose ring around the two men. The sensei didn't stop it. Not this time. His instincts told him something important was about to happen, something the students needed to witness. The two men bowed. Brandon's was quick, perfunctory. Marcus's was deep, respectful. Then they rose, and in that moment, the tension snapped taut like a wire. Brandon lunged first. He came in fast, his youth giving him speed, his pride giving him recklessness. His arm shot forward in a clumsy attempt at a grip. Marcus's hand moved. Just one hand. His fingers closed around Brandon's sleeve with the ease of someone who had done it thousands of times before. It wasn't a hard grip. It wasn't violent. It was gentle, controlled. But the second his hand closed, Brandon froze. The room felt it, the shift, the change in energy. Marcus had taken the first grip. The rest unfolded in silence. With one smooth motion, Marcus stepped forward, his body rotating with perfect alignment. He redirected Brandon's momentum, sweeping him effortlessly off balance. Brandon's feet left the floor, his body flipping over Marcus's hip before crashing into the mat with a heavy thud. Gasps filled the dojo. The students leaned forward, eyes wide. Brandon groaned, scrambling up, his face red with anger. Again, he charged. Again, Marcus's hand closed around him, this time on his collar. Again, Brandon was airborne, crashing down before he had time to react. It was art. It was poetry. Every grip, every throw was seamless, effortless. Marcus didn't look strained. He didn't even look excited. He moved with calm inevitability, like a river carving through stone. Brandon grew more desperate. He attacked with wild fury now, swinging, grabbing, thrashing. But Marcus's hands found him each time. A grip on the wrist, a grip on the sleeve, a grip on the collar, every touch was a lesson, every throw a revelation. The mats thundered with Brandon's falls until he lay sprawled, gasping, unable to rise again. Marcus stepped back, his breathing steady, his face unreadable. He bowed once more, a gesture of respect even to the boy who had mocked him. The dojo was silent, stunned. No one laughed. No one whispered. They had just witnessed something that transcended rank, age, and arrogance. But then, something unexpected happened. Another voice called out. Me. All eyes turned to see one of the senior students stepping forward. A brown belt, respected, disciplined. His eyes burned with something different than Brandon's, curiosity, pride, the need to test himself against the truth he had just seen. Marcus's gaze settled on him. He gave a small nod. They bowed. And then it began again. This time, the fight was sharper, cleaner. The brown belt was skilled, precise. But Marcus was more. He moved with a rhythm the younger man couldn't match. His grips were subtle, almost invisible, but once they landed, the fight was already decided. A twist, a shift, a sweep, and the brown belt hit the mat, stunned. Another stepped forward. Then another. Each one fell. Some harder, some softer, but all of them fell. Marcus's hands, calm and steady, found their grips every time. His throws weren't angry. They weren't violent. They were inevitable, like gravity pulling the world toward the earth. The dojo had transformed. The whispers had vanished, replaced with reverence. The students no longer saw a janitor. They saw a master, one who spoke not with words but with the language of grips, balance, and control. The sensei watched in silence, his eyes narrowed but not with anger, with recognition. He had seen fighters like this before, long ago, in distant tournaments, in stories passed from teacher to student. Masters who had disappeared, who had walked away from the spotlight to live quietly, carrying their knowledge like a secret flame. When the last student fell, Marcus stepped back. He bowed deeply, then walked toward the edge of the mats. He picked up the broom once more, his hands closing around the handle as though it were no different than gripping a GI sleeve. The storm outside cracked with thunder, shaking the windows. Inside, silence reigned. And in that silence, every student understood, they had not just been shown skill. They had been shown truth. The truth that greatness doesn't vanish when ignored. It waits. It waits for the first grip. The storm that had battered the dojo the day before passed in the night, leaving behind streets washed clean and skies of pale silver. But inside the dojo, the storm hadn't ended. It had only changed shape. The students arrived quieter than usual. Their chatter was hushed, their laughter subdued. Something unspoken bound them together, an invisible weight pressing on their shoulders. Every eye flickered toward Marcus, who moved with his usual calmness, broom in hand, sweeping the mats as though yesterday's battles had never happened. But none of them could forget. Brandon still bore a faint bruise on his jaw where his own momentum had met the mat, though he tried to cover it with bravado. The brown belts avoided boasting. Even the sensei carried himself differently, his gaze lingering longer on Marcus than it ever had before. It was Javier who spoke first, though only in a whisper to the student beside him. "He's done this before." "What do you mean?" "You don't move like that unless you've trained your whole life. The way he gripped, the way he threw, my uncle talks about that. Says it's the way champions fight. Champions, not janitors." The whisper spread like wildfire. By mid-morning, the dojo buzzed with speculation. Maybe he used to be a soldier. No, he was a competitor. Did you see the way he tied his belt? That wasn't casual. That was practiced. Competitor? You mean tournaments? International, maybe. Judo. Or Aikido. Something old. Something real. Marcus heard them. He always heard everything. But his face betrayed nothing. His broom whispered across the mats with the same rhythm, step, sweep, step, sweep. He didn't feed their hunger with answers. His silence only made their questions louder. The sensei, however, could not ignore it. That afternoon, when class ended and the last of the students trickled out, he called across the room. "Marcus." The broom stopped. Slowly, Marcus turned, his steady eyes meeting the sensei's. "Come here," the sensei said. Marcus approached, his footsteps even. He bowed slightly, not as a janitor but as a man of discipline acknowledging another. The sensei studied him for a long moment. His gaze was sharp, probing, as if trying to peel back the years written across Marcus's frame. "Where did you learn?" he asked finally. Marcus did not answer right away. He looked past the sensei, toward the empty mats. Memories flickered like ghosts in his mind, the crack of mats in crowded arenas, the roar of crowds, the weight of metals heavy around his neck. The sting of loss, too, sharper than any throw. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, steady. "Long ago." "That's not an answer. It is the only one I will give." The sensei's jaw tightened, but he did not push. He sensed the line Marcus had drawn, a boundary as firm as the mats beneath them. He bowed slightly, acknowledging it. "Then at least tell me this, why here? Why sweeping floors?" Marcus's eyes softened, just for a moment. He looked down at his hands, rough and calloused, then back at the sensei. Because sometimes, when a man has carried too much, the only peace he finds is in simple things. A broom. A mat. A quiet room where no one asks questions. The sensei said nothing more. He nodded once, then turned away. But inside, his mind raced. He had recognized it now, the fluidity, the mastery, the aura that surrounded Marcus. This was no ordinary man. This was someone who had lived a life beyond their comprehension, a shadow of a past life hidden beneath humility. That evening, the whispers grew bolder. A few students stayed late, circling Marcus with questions they didn't dare ask directly. "Sir, Marcus, did you ever compete?" Marcus glanced at them briefly, his eyes unreadable. "I competed with myself." "Were you in the military?" "I fought battles, yes. But not all of them were on mats." Every word was a puzzle, a fragment that deepened the mystery. The students leaned closer, desperate for more, but Marcus turned back to his broom, ending the conversation without ending their curiosity. Javier lingered longest. He stood near the doorway, watching as Marcus locked up for the night. "You're not just a janitor," he said softly. Marcus looked at him then, really looked. His gaze pierced through Javier's youthful bravado, into the core of the boy's uncertainty. For the first time, Marcus allowed a faint smile. "And you're not just a boy. But the world will only see you as one until you prove otherwise." Javier's chest tightened. It was advice, cloaked as truth. He bowed, awkward but genuine, before leaving. When Marcus was finally alone, the dojo dark and silent, he sat on the bench where the GI lay folded. He held it in his hands, running his fingers along the fabric. His mind drifted back. He saw himself younger, stepping onto mats beneath glaring lights. His opponents, fast, strong, skilled, falling one by one to his precision. He remembered the cheers, the medals, the recognition. But he also remembered the cost. The injury that had ended it all, the betrayal of friends who had once been allies, the loneliness that followed when the crowd stopped chanting his name. He remembered walking away. He remembered choosing silence over noise, obscurity over glory. And he remembered the first time he picked up a broom, not as defeat, but as refuge. The mats had always been sacred to him. It didn't matter if he stood on them as a champion or knelt beside them with a rag. They were still the same. They demanded respect. They demanded discipline. And now, perhaps, they demanded his return. A crack of thunder rumbled faintly in the distance. Marcus looked toward the window, his reflection faint in the glass. For a long moment, he studied himself, the lines of age, the scars hidden beneath his shirt, the weight in his eyes. The storm wasn't over. He knew it. The students wouldn't let it go. The sensei wouldn't let it go. And deep inside, a part of himself, one he had buried long ago, wouldn't let it go either. He set the GI down and rose. His broom waited by the wall. He picked it up, hands steady, and began sweeping once more. Step, sweep, step, sweep. But this time, the rhythm carried something new. Not just peace. Not just ritual. It carried the shadows of a past life, shadows that refused to stay hidden. By the next morning, the dojo was electric. Students arrived earlier than usual, whispering in clusters, their voices sharp with speculation. Yesterday's rumors had already hardened into stories. Marcus throwing Brandon like he weighed nothing, Marcus dismantling the brown belts with a grip that felt like iron. Each retelling exaggerated the details, but the core was undeniable. The janitor was no ordinary man. Marcus swept the mats as always. Step, sweep, step, sweep. His shoulders rolled with their quiet rhythm, his eyes focused on the dust that only he seemed to notice. He ignored the stares, the hushed tones, the way the room seemed to bend toward him even when he stood at the edge. He was used to being invisible. What unsettled him now was how much they saw. The sensei entered. He wore his gi crisp as ever, but his stride was heavier, his face marked with something unfamiliar, hesitation. His students bowed, but their bows were shallow, distracted, their eyes drifting toward Marcus even as their foreheads lowered. The sensei felt it like a thorn in his chest. His authority, once absolute, was cracked. "Line up," he commanded. The students obeyed, though their discipline lacked weight. Brandon stood stiffly in the front row, his pride wounded but not extinguished. His eyes burned at Marcus, filled with shame, anger, and something worse, fear. The drills began, sharp movements echoing against the dojo walls. But every strike, every throw, was hollow. The tension was unbearable. Finally, the sensei halted them. His voice cut across the silence, "Enough." He turned his gaze to Marcus. "Step onto the mats." The room froze. Marcus's broom paused mid-sweep. He looked at the sensei, his expression unreadable. Slowly, he leaned the broom against the wall and walked forward. His bare feet whispered across the tatami, steady, measured. He stopped at the center of the room. The sensei faced him, his eyes sharp but not unkind. "You have shown my students something they did not expect. But respect is earned, not whispered about. Today, you will earn it properly." The students held their breath. They knew what this meant. The sensei himself would test Marcus. Not Brandon's reckless youth, not the brown belt's eager pride, but the master of the dojo. They bowed. Marcus's bow was deep, reverent. The sensei's was sharp, formal. When they rose, the storm broke. The sensei struck first, fast, precise, his hand cutting for Marcus's collar. Marcus caught it with fluid ease, redirecting, stepping into the motion. The mats thundered as the sensei rolled, but he recovered instantly, landing light, spinning back. The room gasped. No one had ever seen their teacher handled like that. Again, the sensei attacked, sharper this time, his strikes flowing with practiced rhythm. Marcus moved like water, absorbing, redirecting, never forcing, never resisting. Each grip he took was gentle yet unbreakable. Each throw was a lesson in inevitability. The mats echoed again and again, the sound of a storm contained in four walls. Minutes passed. Sweat glistened on the sensei's brow. Marcus, though older, breathed evenly, his movements precise, controlled. He was not fighting with strength. He was fighting with truth. At last, the sensei launched a final strike, a sweeping throw meant to topple Marcus once and for all. But Marcus shifted his weight, his hands finding the perfect grip, and in one seamless motion, the master himself struck the mat. Silence. The sensei lay still for a moment, staring up at the ceiling, his breath heavy. Then, slowly, he rose. He bowed deeply, lower than he had ever bowed to any man before. The students erupted into whispers, then silence again as they followed their teacher's example. One by one, they bowed to Marcus. Brown belts, white belts, even Brandon, his pride burning, bent low. Respect filled the room, heavy and real. Marcus returned the bow, his movements slow, humble. He had not sought this. He had not wanted this. Yet here it was, laid at his feet like an offering. The sensei spoke, his voice rough but steady. "From this day forward, you are no longer invisible in this dojo. You are not Janitor. You are teacher, if you wish it. The mats will remember your hands. Marcus's eyes softened, though his face stayed calm. He bowed once more. I am only a man with a broom, he said quietly. But if they wish to learn, I will not deny them. The student stirred, moved by the humility in his voice. Javier's eyes shone brightest. He saw not just a master, but a man who carried greatness without needing to display it. To him, Marcus was more than teacher. He was proof that strength could live quietly, humbly, without ever boasting. Brandon lingered at the back, his fists clenched. Respect did not come easily to him, but the truth was undeniable. His voice was low, grudging, but real when he spoke. You're better than all of us. I was wrong. Marcus looked at him, and for the first time, he spoke directly. Better is not the word. I am older. I have fallen more times than you have yet stood. That is all. The word struck deeper than any throw. Brandon lowered his eyes, shame and respect colliding in his chest. Class ended with no drills, no sparring. Instead, the students filed past Marcus one by one, bowing to him as they left. Not out of fear. Not out of obligation. Out of respect. When the dojo was empty, Marcus picked up his broom once more. He swept the mats quietly, his rhythm unchanged. Step, sweep, step, sweep. But this time, he was not alone in the silence. Respect lingered on the floor, in every corner, in every whisper of dust the broom carried away. He had not asked for it. He had not sought it. But at last, after years of invisibility, the floor itself bore witness. Marcus Reed was no longer just the man who cleaned the mats. He was the man the mats respected. The dojo never felt the same again. It was as though the walls themselves had absorbed what had happened, the sound of the sensei striking the mats, the collective bow of the students, the silence of respect that had followed. Something permanent had shifted. But Marcus Reed, the man at the center of it all, did not change. The next morning, he came in at dawn as always. He filled his bucket, dipped his rag, swept his broom across the mats with the same measured rhythm. Step, sweep, step, sweep. His shoulders rolled with quiet grace. His face betrayed nothing. Yet everything around him was different. The students entered softly, their chatter muted, their eyes lowered in a way that had nothing to do with shame but everything to do with reverence. No one laughed. No one mocked. They bowed to the sensei as always, but now, without being told, each one also bowed to Marcus. At first, he ignored it. He continued sweeping, his back straight, his movements precise. But after the third or fourth bow, he finally acknowledged them with a faint nod. It was not pride. It was not acceptance of glory. It was acknowledgement, humble, measured, honest. Brandon, who once ridiculed him most loudly, was the last to bow. His pride fought it, his fists clenched at his sides. But when Marcus's calm gaze met his, Brandon bent low, holding the bow longer than anyone else. When he rose, his eyes no longer burned with resentment. They held something Marcus had waited to see, humility. The sensei stepped forward, GI crisp, eyes sharp. He faced Marcus at the center of the mats. You swept floors to keep this place clean, he said, his voice steady. But yesterday, you swept away arrogance. You swept away pride. You swept away blindness. You revealed what was hidden in plain sight. For that, this dojo is in your debt. Marcus inclined his head slightly. I revealed nothing. I only answered what was asked of me. The sensei studied him, then gave a small smile. Then perhaps it is time we ask differently. He gestured toward the folded GI, placed neatly on the bench. The same GI Brandon had once thrown at Marcus in mockery. Now, it sat like an offering, gleaming white in the morning light. The students shifted, their breaths caught. The room held its silence as Marcus walked to the bench. His hand hovered above the GI for a long moment, fingers brushing lightly against the fabric. Memories flooded him, the roar of the crowd, the sting of old defeats, the medals he once buried in a box he never opened. He thought of his wife, who had once told him, "You don't need to prove who you are. Those who can see, will see." He lifted the GI. With steady hands, he slipped it on, tying the belt with the same fluid motion that had silenced the dojo days before. The knot formed easily, as though it had never left him. The students exhaled softly. To them, it was not a janitor putting on a uniform. It was a master reclaiming his place. The sensei stepped forward, bowed deeply, and spoke words that no one expected. "From this day, you are not our janitor. You are our teacher. If you accept it." The room stilled. Every student looked at Marcus, their eyes wide, waiting. Marcus tied the knot tighter, then looked at the sensei. His face was calm, but his eyes carried weight. "I will not be called teacher," he said quietly. "I am Marcus. That is enough." The sensei inclined his head. "Then Marcus it shall be. But know this, the mats belong to you as much as they belong to me. You have shown us what respect truly means." For the first time, Marcus allowed himself the faintest smile. "Respect is not on the mats," he said. "It is in how you carry yourself when you leave them." The word struck deeper than any throw. The students nodded slowly, their faces solemn. They understood. The rest of the class was unlike any they had ever known. The sensei led drills, but Marcus moved among the students. Quietly, correcting grips, adjusting stances, showing small details that changed everything. His touch was light, his guidance humble, but each correction revealed mastery beyond anything they had learned before. Javier beamed when Marcus adjusted his footwork. Brandon gritted his teeth when Marcus corrected his grip, but for once, he listened. One by one, the students felt their pride unravel, replaced by hunger to learn. By the time class ended, no one wanted to leave. They lingered, speaking softly, bowing to Marcus again and again. He only nodded, picking up his broom once more, returning to the task that had always grounded him. As the students filed out, Javier lingered at the door. "Mr. Marcus," he asked softly. Marcus turned. "Why do you still clean, after everything?" Marcus's gaze softened. He looked at the broom in his hands, then at the spotless mats. "Because respect begins here," he said. "The mats must always be clean. Without them, there is no dojo, no practice, no truth. Greatness doesn't mean standing above others. It means kneeling when no one else will." Javier swallowed hard. He bowed deeply, more deeply than ever before. "Thank you." Marcus watched him leave, then turned back to his sweeping. Step, sweep, step, sweep. The rhythm filled the room once more, steady and eternal. The storm outside had passed, leaving sunlight pouring through the windows. The dojo glowed with golden warmth. Marcus swept quietly, the GI across his shoulders, the broom in his hands. And though he had never sought recognition, though he had never asked for a title, he knew now that he had left something behind, not medals, not trophies, but respect written into the floor itself. The broom and the GI. Two symbols of who he was. One of humility, one of mastery. Both equally his. And that was enough.